His father was in a recliner, half asleep, when he said the thing that Martin would spend the next 6 months trying to answer. The television was on, but neither of them was watching it. The house smelled the way it always had. Old wood and coffee left too long on the burner. His father's hip was bruised from the fall. The room was quiet in the particular way of rooms that have held a lot of silence over the years. And then, without opening his eyes, his father said it. Out of all of them. "You always come." Martin didn't say anything. His father's voice dropped lower. "I worry about you. When I'm gone, who's going to come for you?" Martin looked at the television. He looked at his hands. He looked at everything in that room except his father's face. Because he didn't have an answer. He had driven 90 miles that evening. He had used 2 of his 5 remaining vacation days. And while he sat in this dim living room, helping an old man upstairs and making food from whatever was left in the refrigerator, his brother had sent a thumbs-up emoji, and his sister had texted to say she felt terrible. That night, Martin Calloway began to understand something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. He had spent years being the person everyone else needed, and he had no idea, not one, if anyone would do the same for him. Martin was 38 years old. He worked in facilities management for a company in Columbus, Ohio. He was the kind of man who fixed things before anyone knew they were broken. At work, in his family, in every relationship he had ever been in. He remembered birthdays. He answered on the second ring. He showed up on short notice and never once mentioned the distance afterward. Every Sunday without exception, he drove to his sister Carla's house for dinner. He brought a dish he had made that afternoon. He stayed until the end. And when dinner was over, he washed the dishes while Carla and her husband sat with their coffee and talked about their week. Nobody ever asked about his. That detail. The not asking. It had lived in Martin quietly for a long time. He kept it somewhere he didn't visit often, the way you keep things that hurt but don't bleed. He had a notebook in the drawer of his nightstand. He had never told anyone about it. It wasn't a journal. It was more like a record of small, quiet moments he hadn't been able to put down anywhere else. The time he drove 4 hours to help his brother-in-law move furniture. 2 years later, when Martin needed the same help, his brother-in-law cited a bad knee. A knee that healed completely by the following weekend, based on the photos from a camping trip. The time he covered a shift for his co-worker Dana without being asked. When he needed the same favor 6 months later, she said she had plans. She posted photos from those plans before he had even left the building. Small things. The kind of things you are supposed to be too mature to track. But the notebook kept filling up. Martin had told himself for years that this was just who he was, that the generous person doesn't keep a ledger, that being the one who shows up without needing anything back was a form of strength. Sitting in his father's living room that night, 90 miles from home, vacation days spent, listening to an old man wonder aloud who would take care of his son. Martin started to wonder if what he had been calling strength had another name. He had loved them in a way that made their love for him unnecessary, and he had called that generosity. If you have ever been the one who always shows up, the one who remembers, who drives the distance, who fills every silence, and you have quietly wondered whether any of it is truly seen, this story is for you. Subscribe and stay close. Because what Martin does next is something most people never find the courage to do. Martin drove home on the 4th day. The following Sunday he went to Carla's dinner. He brought his dish. He sat at the table. He ate. When dinner was over, Martin stood up and stopped. Halfway between his chair and the sink, plates in his hands. He looked at the table. Carla was on her phone. Her husband was refilling his coffee. Nobody had looked up. Martin set the plates back down. Quietly. Not a statement. Not a performance. Just down. He sat back in his chair. Nearly a full minute passed before Carla glanced over. You don't have to do those if you're tired. I know, Martin said. I'm not going to. Carla's expression shifted. Not dramatically, just something behind her eyes recalibrating. Okay, she said, in the tone of someone who has noticed a door that was always open is no longer open. Her husband did the dishes that night, sighing with the energy of a man performing a task for an audience that had already left the room. Martin drove home and didn't open the nightstand drawer. The weeks that followed were harder than he had expected. Carla got quiet. Then, after 2 weeks of that quiet, she got annoyed. She sent a text, carefully worded, the kind that tries to sound casual while being anything but. She said Martin seemed checked out, that the family noticed when he wasn't fully present. Martin read the message 4 times, then he put his phone face down on the counter, because what she was calling him being checked out was just him not doing extra things nobody had ever asked him to do in the first place. Theo called a few days later. More direct. What's going on with you, man? Carla says you've been weird. Martin told him calmly that nothing was going on. That he was fine, Theo said. All right, just don't be like that. Don't be like that. Martin held those words for a long time, because what Theo meant, without meaning to say it, was don't stop being the version of you that requires nothing from us. Then, 3 months in, Martin's car broke down. A Tuesday evening, 40 minutes from home, a dead battery on the side of a county road with a tow truck 45 minutes out. He texted Carla first. No response for 2 hours. When she finally replied, it was, "Oh no, I hope you got it sorted. Past tense, already assuming it was handled." He texted Theo. Theo replied in 20 minutes. "Ugh, man, I'm in the middle of something. Can you call a tow?" Martin put his phone in his pocket and sat on the guardrail in the dark, watching headlights pass on the road. He thought about the 4 hours he had driven to help move a couch. He thought about the notebook. He thought about his father's voice in that dim living room. "Who's going to come for you?" The tow truck came. Martin handled it. He always handled it. But something finished closing inside him that night, quietly and completely, like a door being shut for the last time. He almost went back after that. The guilt was real. The voice in his own head, reasonable, calm, devastating, kept asking whether he was being difficult, whether he was punishing people for things they didn't know they had done, whether the right thing was simply to be the bigger person and return to being who he had always been. He didn't go back, not because he was angry, but because he finally understood that going back wasn't generosity. It was just a way of making sure no one ever had to grow. Now, before this story turns, I want to ask you something. If you were sitting on that guardrail in the dark, and you had already done everything Martin had done, would you have held the line, or would the guilt have pulled you back? Leave your answer in the comments, because I think a lot of people already know which version of themselves shows up in that moment. And if you know someone who has been the guardrail for everyone else their whole life, send this to them right now. What happens next is the part they need to hear. 6 months after the night on the county road, Martin's father fell again. Smaller this time, a stumble more than a fall, but enough that someone needed to be at the house for a few days. Martin texted the family group chat, not offering, just informing. Dad took a small fall. He's okay, but he shouldn't be alone for a few days. I can do Thursday and Friday. Can someone take the weekend? The chat went quiet. The kind of quiet that 8 months earlier would have ended with Martin filling every gap without being asked. Then Carla replied, "I've got Saturday and Sunday. Then Theo. I'll take Friday night. I'll bring dinner." Martin read those messages slowly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reckoning. It wasn't the conversation where everyone sat down and acknowledged what they had taken from him. Life doesn't often give you those moments, but they showed up. Martin closed the chat and sat with that for a while. That evening, he sat in his car outside his apartment building before going inside. Not because he was sad, but because he needed a moment with something he hadn't felt quite this clearly before. He thought about the recliner, the dim light, his father's voice barely above a whisper. "Who's going to come for you?" He looked down at his phone. Carla had taken the weekend. Theo was bringing dinner on Friday. For 11 years, Martin had been the answer for everyone else. For the first time, he wasn't the only one. For the first time in 11 years, Martin had an answer. The notebook was still in the nightstand drawer. He hadn't opened it in months. He didn't throw it away. Some things you keep not because you still need them, but because they remind you of what it cost to get here. It had stopped growing, and that was enough. Martin didn't stop being kind. He simply stopped making it so easy for people to forget him. The people who loved him finally had to choose. Not because Martin demanded anything, but because he stopped doing their part for them. Most of them chose well, and the ones who didn't gave him something just as valuable: the truth about who they actually were. The moment Martin stopped carrying everyone else was the moment he finally learned who was willing to carry him. That's not a guarantee. It won't always go that way. But here is what is always true. The people who love you should not need your exhaustion to remember you exist.